Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name is Cameron, and today we're going to be taking a look at two bourbons from the core lineup of one of my favorite distilleries. This is the third release of Bardstown Bourbon Company's Discovery and Fusion series. Alright, so let's talk a bit about Bardstown Bourbon Company. This is a fairly young distillery who is still in the process of aging their own distillate, so right now they're sourcing most of their bourbon from other distilleries and either finishing it in secondary casks or blending it together in the releases that we're going to be looking at today. Now, they have two main lines of products that they're currently offering. The first, and probably the most special, is their collaborative series. I have 3 bottles from that collaborative series back here, 2 collaborations with Copper and Kings, where they have finished bourbon in either apple brandy or Spanish Oloroso sherry casks, and then 1 collaboration here with Chateau de l'Abad, where they finished some bourbon in French Armagnac casks. For all of these finished products in their collaborative series, all of the sourced bourbon is coming from one distillery of one age. They're not blending anything and then finishing. It's simply one bourbon from, MGP or Dickel, places like that then get finished in these secondary casks. Now, for their core lineup, the releases that we're going to be looking at in this video, what they do is they actually source from multiple distilleries, sometimes including their own young distillate in the mix, and they blend all of that together without a secondary cask finish. They have 2 different offerings in this core lineup. I mentioned that we have the Fusion series over here with the blue label, and we also have the Discovery series with this red label. These are both the 3rd batch of these 2 series, and actually the 4th batch just dropped, and I'm really excited to try that. But before I try those offerings, I wanted to get a review out of these 2. I'm actually heading down to the distillery in just a couple of days here. By the time this video comes out, I might already be at the distillery, so I'm very excited to see what's going on there. So we're going to start first with this bottle, the Fusion series, and this is the sort of lower end bottle of their core lineup. This is about $60 MSRP, and I'm going to take you through what is actually in this bottle because Bardstown Bourbon Company is so transparent that they actually put the entire blend right here on the label for you. This sort of chart that they have, it lays out how much of each bourbon is in here. It lays out where that bourbon is from, how old it is, and its mash bill. The only thing it leaves out is the distillery that it's sourced from, but if you know some of these different distilleries' mash bills, you can figure that out pretty quickly. Now, the Fusion series is called Fusion because they are essentially fusing older distillate that has been sourced with some of their own young distillate to create a blend of both, older bourbons and younger bourbons. So for this Fusion series number 3 offering, we have 3 different bourbons in the mix. One is a sourced 13-year, and the other 2 are both 3-year-old bourbons that are from Bardstown Bourbon Company that are still aging. So the 13-year that we have is pretty assuredly from Barton, based on the 74-18-8 mash bill, and there's 40% of that 13-year-old. The other 60% is split 18 and 42. 18% is a wheated 3-year mash bill from Bardstown Bourbon Company, and 42% is a 3-year high rye mash bill from Bardstown Bourbon Company. So I know that's a lot of information to throw at you. You can find this on their website, but I am going to list off the stats of the Discovery very quickly as well before we get into tasting both of these. And before I do that, I should also mention that the Fusion's percentage here, we have 49.45% ABV, which is 98.9 proof. So a pretty solid, very drinkable, very approachable proof here. Now, on to the heavy hitter. We have the Discovery Series 3, which is garnering a ton of praise from other whiskey tubers, from other reviewers. This is 55% ABV, 110 proof. Seems like it's probably been proofed down just a little bit to get there. It's probably not quite cask strength. We also have 3 bourbons in the mix for this bottling as well. We have 1 Indiana. We can pretty much guess that's MGP. and 2 Kentucky distilleries listed here. So 45% from MGP is a 13-year bourbon, and it's their 21% rye mash bill, which is my personal favorite. We have 32% of a 13-year-old. Again, this is almost certainly Barton Juice, 74-18-8. So we have 45 MGP, 32 of a 13-year Barton, and finally a 10-year rounds this out, which is 23% of a Kentucky bourbon. It's 75-13-12. This could be a few different things, but it's believed that it's Wild Turkey in here. But don't quote me on that. Don't bring on the YouTube mob if I've got that wrong. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pour a glass of each of these. We're going to taste through the Fusion first and the Discovery second. I'm not sure if I mentioned it already, but the Discovery's MSRP is around $120 to $130. So it's it's double the Fusion, but you'll see as we get into tasting this, it's pretty well worth that premium price tag. So I'm going to go ahead and pour now both of these so that we can get into the tasting here. Now, as I'm pouring this, I need to give a quick shout out to my friend Mark, a colleague and a friend of mine who is actually lending me this Fusion bottle. I don't own any Bardstown Fusion yet, so I asked Mark if he would be kind enough to let me borrow that in exchange for a sample of a 1792 foolproof store pick. So I think it was a pretty even trade there to kind of, make that exchange. All right, so I've got both of these poured now. Going to start with the 49.45% Fusion Series offering, $60 MSRP from Bardstown Bourbon Company. So on the nose, already you sort of get this really nice bouquet, I guess, of light aromas. Okay, there's nothing dense and heavy about this. It's really sort of sweet and sort of fruity. There's some banana, there's some light caramels, there's some light honey. Yeah, and it's just really, really approachable. There's almost maybe a slight bit of a floral note in there as well. A little bit of young rye spice. You can definitely assume that's from the 3-year-old distillate from Bardstown Bourbon Company. And you know what's interesting is there's something damp about this. I don't know how else to say it than that. It's almost like you're walking around in a damp forest. Now, it's not necessarily the wood and the oak, the wood influences that you'd be smelling in the forest, but just the dampness of that sort of environment, all the, maybe humidity or water in the air, just all of that kind of thing. You kind of smell that here. With some of those notes I mentioned, banana, honey, caramel, you can almost pick apart from the different combination of things, different combination of bourbons rather, in this bottle, where those might be coming from. So the banana note, I can pretty much guess that that's coming from the Barton. All of the 1792 stuff has that banana note in there. Even the Sam Houston 14, which is probably a pretty close comparison to a 13-year-old Barton product. Even Sam Houston 14 has a little bit of banana in there, which kind of seems like furniture polish in some ways to me, but I think it's actually banana. That Barton banana is pretty clear here in the Fusion. Now, like the honey and the light caramel is probably coming from that 3-year wheated mash bill, and then obviously like this young rye spice is coming from that high rye 3-year-old mash bill. So it's an interesting conglomeration where you can actually pick it apart, and it's pretty neat in that way because it's a great blend on the nose, but it's also distinguishable by its parts. And there could be something slightly nutty about this. I think it's more of like a brittle caramel because of the youth of some of those bourbons involved. Let's check it out on the palate. This is a really developmental type bourbon. The first thing I get is like sort of a cheap corn grain or maybe even wheat grain note. When you have like a really young bourbon and you can taste the grain, it hasn't quite, made its way into some of those deeper, richer flavors. You get that on the front end of the palate here, but it quickly evolves with a rush of great sort of cinnamon and rye spice. And then it transforms into like some really creamy caramels and honeys. Again, they're light, they're not dense and heavy, but the beginning of the palate definitely transforms as it works its way, into the mid to back palate, into the finish here. I'm gonna take another sip. It gets way better on that second sip. The sort of nuttiness is coming out now just a bit. The cheap, I would call it the cheap experience of the front of palate with that grain note is kind of going away now, and it's being replaced by those nice honeys and caramels, you know, sort of as your palate acclimates to this bourbon here. You know, the spice is pretty prevailing here, and actually I mentioned that it's definitely the rye spice, of course, but it's manifesting as a combination of cinnamon and pepper. Right now in the finish, in the sort of back palate into the back of the throat, it's really peppery and prickly, and it's great. It's lingering a lot more than you would think for this kind of a blend. Even though it does have some 13-year-old in there, there's only 40% of that. 60% is young juice, and it's hanging on a lot more than you would expect. And actually, from the first time I've tried this to right now, I like this a lot more. I kind of dig this stuff. All right, I'll do one more taste and then we'll go on to the Discovery Series 3. It's so drinkable. The spice is not overwhelming, but it's just strong enough to, like, you know, kick you in the butt a little bit, but it's so drinkable. What a great sipper. Oh my goodness. Now, I'm going to focus on the finish here a little bit more. There's definitely some oak. It's not super heavy, but if you chew just a little bit on this, you can really get into some nice oak. That's got to be coming from the 13-year-old Barton, I would have to imagine. Now, overall for this, at $60, it's a little high for me. I'd love to see this at 45 to 50, but I totally understand everything that Bardstown Bourbon Company is doing here by offering these two tiers of these really well put together blends. And honestly, for the transparency, for the sort of sleek look of the bottles, everything about the presentation, I'm willing to pay that $60 for this. Probably more so than I was after the first sip that I had of this. After that first sip, I was a little wishy-washy, but at this point, I've got to say, this Fusion Series 3 is worth it, and I'm looking forward to trying number 4. Okay, let's go ahead and move on now to the fabled Discovery Series 3. If you just take a look at the colors here, it's not vastly different. Well, actually, it's kind of vastly different. The Discovery is much darker. So this is just a beautiful, beautiful amber. There's a little bit of sort of that, you know, dark orange, burnt orange color in there. Now, what's interesting about this Discovery on the nose is that it doesn't jump out of the glass. Like, the Fusion actually jumps out of the glass probably from those younger whiskeys in there, even though it's a lower ABV. This Discovery is very mellow, very chill. And it was something, the last time I sat down with this, I thought, I must be crazy. Maybe I've had too much bourbon. But this is the first drink I've had all day. And I've got to say, it just kind of sits there, and you really have to get into it to get anything out of the nose. And let me just remind you what's in here. Again, we have some 13-year MGP, some 13-year-old Barton, and some 10-year-old, assumption that it is Wild Turkey in there. So some really great stuff. Yeah, so on the nose here, we get this great combination of really deep, deep aromas. There is some great caramel and butterscotch, but there's also an overwhelming amount of like dark cherry notes for me, like Luxardo cherry, none of that cheap stuff. This is purely rich and very, very dense. Now, if you want to sort of hone in on the spice here, I would definitely say it's in the realm of cinnamon spice backed up with some baking spices, probably from that high rye MGP, I would have to guess. It's a nice addition. It doesn't pop through too much, but it just balances out those awesome sweet flavors of the cherry and the butterscotch and caramel. Yeah, overall, just a super balanced nose. It's just incredible. I mean, the only complaint about the nose I could possibly have is that a higher proof might do it well, so that it could jump out of the glass just a little bit more here. All right, let's check it out on the palate. Oh my goodness. Oh. That is so good. the first thing that you're hit with is this rush of baking spice and oak. Like, there's a great amount of oak on here, but to me, it's not overpowering at all. It's not an oak bomb. It's so well integrated. Baking spice, oak, that really rich cherry, and then all of it right now is rounded out by, of course, the typical caramels and butterscotches you would get. It really coats the mouth. I'm going to go in for another sip here. Just like I talked about with the Fusion series, you can kind of dissect this into its individual parts. I would say that this one is a little less clear, maybe, than the Fusion. Like, some of these things are just so well integrated, you know? But I think that really rich cherry note is probably coming from the wild turkey. Some of the leather and oak funk that I'm getting right now, that's probably a combination of all of these, to be honest. You can find that in turkey products. You can find it in MGP. You can definitely find the oak in an older Barton. 13 years would definitely do that. But even with all of that said, even with the amount of integration we have here, you can still kind of pick out the different distilleries. You know, it's just incredible. I'm going to go for one last sip here and really focus on the finish this time. Yeah, the oak really starts to become obvious as you continue sipping on this. Not only on the palate. The palate is where it hit me first, but the nose, once you have one sip and you go back to it on the nose, the oak is just exploding out of the glass. I mean, I'm still sort of in the back palate before I even get to the finish. The spice, the cinnamon spice in the back of my throat is crazy. I mean, it is hanging on forever. And in the front palate, mid palate, in your mouth here, it's still mouth-watering. I have a hard time talking because my mouth is watering so much, just from those really rich, especially the cherry notes, but also, again, the butterscotches that we have in there and everything like that. The baking spices are just wonderful. Just an incredible whiskey. Now, if I had to say one thing about this, I think I already mentioned this maybe on the nose. I would love to see this cranked up maybe 5% ABV, you know, like up to a 60%, I think. What do we have here? Yeah, 55%. So if we went up to 60, I think this would be an even more incredible whiskey. I don't know if it's proof down. I have to assume it is to get to that 55 number. But if there was like a cask strength or a higher proof version of this, it would be even better. But where it stands now, my one word of advice would be, you know, bring it into your mouth and rinse it around just a little bit. That way you can really get the full experience. I've sipped it and then I've also rinsed it around. This is one where I really want it to coat my palate, to get into, you know, every part of your mouth, so that you can really have that full experience from what this is. Overall, just a seriously great whiskey for 120 to 130 bucks. It's steep, I know, it's a premium price, but my God, like when I think about the Yellowstone limited edition, which I totally gave a terrible review to, and I think about this, here in Ohio, those are the exact same prices. It is comical to me. You should absolutely pick this bourbon up, especially if you're looking for something as sort of a special occasion bottle and you're in that price range and you're willing to spend that $120. Overall, I think these are both great offerings. I cannot wait to try the fourth release of both of these. Hopefully I'll get a chance at the distillery when I head down there. But I think that's all for this review. Thumbs up for these two bottles. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to this channel. Go ahead and like this video. It would mean the world to me. I've been getting some good traction on some of the things I've been putting up recently and really trying to grow the audience. You can find me on Instagram, follow me there, like me on Facebook, all of that good stuff. Let me know if you have anything you'd like me to review. Go ahead and send me an email, drop me a comment here on YouTube. Otherwise, I will see you guys next time here on Drums and Drams after I visited the Bardstown Bourbon Company. I'm so excited about that. I heard the restaurant is amazing. So cheers to all of you and happy holidays.